Hey there guys, before we get into today's episode, as you saw from my cute little graphic at the beginning there's going to be some spoilers here. And this is going to be the only time I audibly tell you about it. Going forward, I'm just going to be using that graphic and we're just going to be jumping right in. And speaking of jumping right in, I usually leave some time for thank yous and recommendations and other little notes at the end of every video, but we're not going to be doing that this time or for the next few episodes of Sonic Speed Reading. And that's because the story arc we're covering is a pretty long and pretty dense one. And as much as I love this series, I do want to cover other Sonic comic books, and I also have other shows I want to work on. This isn't exactly a comic book channel. I don't do this for a living, and I'm only one guy, so it takes me a lot of time and energy to get videos made, and I want to get these done as fast as possible, but still at the same time give them room to breathe. So we're going to be waiting till the very end before I give you my general overview thoughts on this story, my recommendations for other channels or further reading, and of course, the many thank yous I have for the amazing patrons who support me and get the show early. So thank you for your understanding, and let's not waste any more time, because now it's time to begin the Zombot story arc. But before we get into the actual story arc, there are a couple of things we need to discuss that I have failed to mention previously. That begins with these two, Rough and Tumble. They are your classic two-man tag team of bully bad boys, a proud tradition made famous by Bebop and Rocksteady of TMNT fame, and then glammed up by Jesse and James of Pokemon fame. And this pairing's even been used a couple times in extended Sonic media, but unlike a lot of those other pairings, these guys actually look like Sonic characters. Certainly more than the first time they used a skunk in a Sonic comic. I don't really plan on doing a full episode on these two characters, because you've probably seen this set up plenty of times before. A couple of brutes who can give the heroes the business, but never actually win. They're just here to carry out orders and fill time with fights that usually end in a comedic defeat. And I have a really hard time differentiating their personalities. I know the big one has a missing tail and he's real sensitive about it, but they are basically the same person between two different bodies. Not much below the surface, but they are still fun every time they show up. Considering how new the IDW universe is, we haven't had a chance to have too many encounters with them, but we already know the deal. They're jerks and they love weapons. First time they used Wispins, and then they got their tailless tuckus whooped by Sonic and Knuckles, then they showed back up with some new weapons. And again, they got defeated. They are a threat to normal civilians, but obviously don't stand much of a chance against Sonic and his crew. And they wouldn't even have had a second chance to tackle Sonic and his friends had they not been busted out of jail first. And that's thanks to the third new villain we're going to be discussing, Dr. Starline, a brilliant yet self-absorbed scientist and a die-hard Eggman fanboy. Think of Snively just, not sniveling, and with actual smarts to back up all that ambition. Now, I know this dude looks like he should be griefing Scrooge McDuck and his nephews, but nope, this is a Sonic character, and he's not a duck, he's a platypus. A dastardly duck-billed pretentious platypus. And what a fantastic fit for this franchise. How have they not used one of these before? They have hedgehogs and echidnas. Oh, and speaking of, did you know that these things are the only other mammal, besides echidnas, that lay eggs? And they're poisonous? I completely forgot about that before Gilly the Kid randomly reminded me while we were talking about these odd little animals. Oh, and shout out to Gilly, of course. If you've not checked out his channel, go do that, you big dum-dum. Don't you like good things? Look at his neck. Look how beautiful that neck is. Go watch his stuff. You dum-dum. They lay eggs, they got a duck bill, a beaver tail, spurred feet, and they're poisonous. How are jackalopes not a real thing, but this is? How is a Psyduck, the closest Pokemon comparison I can make, less weird than the actual animal? Also, how do Sonic and Pokemon not have jackalope characters yet? Come on, guys. Well, Starline doesn't have a beaver tail, but he does have webbed gloves and spurs on his heeled boots. I love those little details. Oh, and he also has a warped topaz. That's right, kids. We have yet another magical MacGuffin made from precious stone in the Sonic universe. And it does what the name implies. Warps you from one place to the other. It's basically a portal gun, which, yes, is basically chaos control. Essentially making this like another stupid gem. Somewhat redundant. I'll share more of my general opinion on the reliance of pretty rocks at the end of this arc's coverage, but for now, pay attention because this gem is important. And thankfully, unlike the Phantom Ruby, the capabilities of the Warp Topaz are clearly laid out. Starline has spent his life studying this specific gem, so he has a really good handle on how to use it. And use it he does. He can hop from one place to another in an instant or open a portal to use as a window to peer into other parts of the world if he were, say, in search of something or someone and needed to scour a large amount of land in a short amount of time. And he can use this as a means to transport equipment or allies with ease, or leave items in specific places without ever being detected. All of that without having to hold it above his head and yell chaos control. So yes, it is a very useful gem, but unlike the emeralds, it is not a source of its own energy. It needs outside assistance to make any of this possible. Thankfully for Starline, as he discovered, it really doesn't take much to get this thing going. As he puts it, even the most passive of energy waves will get it to do all of those wonderful things I just listed. I think that would make this the most battery efficient thing ever created by Sega. Too bad it's fictional, because seriously, Sega, how do you have a device made in 2020 that runs on 2 AA batteries and still only lasts for a couple of hours? I know the Game Gear Micro's a throwback, but you do understand, like, this was the one thing nobody wanted to come back, right? How is this thing $50? 4 ROMs. Why do I still want it? What's wrong with me? Anyway, while the Warp Topaz is energy efficient, that energy needs to remain on the low side, and it needs to remain controlled. With years of research and practice, as well as a custom-made glove, the platypus is now the only person on the planet who can confidently use the topaz in an efficient and masterful way. He even gives Sonic and Silver a hard time when he faces off against them in a later issue. These 3 new villains were created to fill a specific role that had not yet been filled in this new canon, and honestly, I think they fit quite well, be it more simple like the skunks or more complex like the platypus. I quickly grew to like all of these characters. They fit in well with Sonic's world, and even better with his nemesis, Eggman, or as we last knew him when we last were with him, Mr. Tinker. As I pointed out in the video covering the battle for Angel Island, he had actually been kidnapped in a quick page between all the action with Neo Metal Sonic. Well, that's all thanks to Starline and his pretty swirly marble. The Knot Duck used his topaz to open windows all across the world to track down Eggman after he was defeated in the war. He managed to do what Eggman's roaming badniks had failed to do for months. He found Eggman, and then portaled out Rough and Tumble from jail in exchange for capturing Tinker to bring him to Starline, where he would begin the process of returning Eggman to his old self. But despite his best efforts, he doesn't seem to be getting anywhere. I mean, it does look like Tinker is taking more of an interest to Eggman's old badniks, but considering that he coddles them, this is clearly still Tinker through and through. Also, I just wanted to quickly point out how much I love the quick interaction between Tinker and Warbot and Cubot. They just don't know how to handle a kind Robotnik. He even asked if they'd feel better if he yelled at them, or maybe gave him a list of eldritch monsters that he can resurrect and lose control over. It's stuff like this that makes me stress that you really need to read the comics. It's full of great little moments like this that a summary can't properly cover. I also love the layout of the lab, clearly reminiscent of the interior of Sonic Adventure's egg carrier. Also, that reminds me, later on in the issue, we see Rouge chilling on a sunbathing chair and comments on Eggman's surprising workout routine. Like, that has to be a nod to those goofy pool chairs in the egg carrier, right? I know it's not the exact same design, but I remember thinking it was hilarious that Robotnik had an indoor pool and a ton of sunbathing chairs surrounding it in the game. Ah, man, whatever, that's great. But back to the lab. The reason why we had to focus on the door in the first place is because somebody was coming through it, and that somebody, or something, was Metal Sonic. But now that we're all caught up with Starline and Tinker, we do need to rewind a little bit. As you might recall, Metal Sonic had returned to normal after his defeat on Angel Island. But Sonic wasn't just going to let that robot run free. No, first he was going to have Tails reactivate him, make him functional again, but of course make his weapons useless, and then set him free. I had a couple of problems with this after I read this scene. I mean, it just seemed like the stupidest move to make, but it is consistent with Sonic's characterization in this comic, and it would be addressed somewhat. We'll get to that in due time. That and this series itself has set the precedence of some sort of robotic sentience in Eggman's machines. Both Orbot and Cubot in this very issue are mentioned to have emotions programmed into them. Gemerald and Omega are both their own beings, and when Metal had a voice, he too seemed to be his own person. So I understand why Sonic would treat him as a person, and have the compassion to offer him another path outside of Eggman's service, since to him, that's no longer an option. But Metal, unsurprisingly, tells Sonic where he can stick his friendship, in the silent miming way he knows how to do, and then jets off. Tails, who has rightfully been questioning Sonic's choices yet been going along with them just fine, asks Sonic if it was a good idea to let this consistently dangerous robot off on his own. And Sonic's like, yeah, no, it's fine. And then 2 pages later, Metal shows up at the hidden lab where Tinker is being held. Alright, another thing before I go forward, this was another glaring issue I had. So Neo Metal's whole deal was taking Eggman's place while he was simultaneously searching for the real deal once he went missing after the war. He had Badniks and the Egg Fleet at his disposal, but couldn't find him all this time. But now that he's a mutant-neutered robot with no resources, he finds the guy in seemingly seconds. Is it because the base is letting off some sort of signal? Is it because Sonic also clued Metal into the fact that Eggman was alive and well? Am I just missing a throwaway line here? I mean, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but come on. But whatever the case is, Metal's appearance is the final push needed to bring back Dr. Ivo Eggman Robotnik. And we can argue over what we call this guy all we want, but one name that absolutely no longer fits is Mr. Tinker. I was genuinely surprised how much I enjoyed the Tinker persona and how bummed I was to see it leave, as inevitable as it was. I had a good time with his scenes, and ironically, Sonic seemed to get along best with Eggman when he was dressed like a long-lost Mario brother. Oh well, it was fun while it lasted. Toot toot, Tinker. As sad as it was to say goodbye to the sunnier side of Eggman, the comic wastes no time in re-establishing how great of a character the real deal actually is. I can just hear Mike Pollock in his lines. It's fantastic. Eggman wastes no time assessing the scene before him and letting everybody in the room, old and new, know that he was in charge, sending Orb and Cube to get him some more fitting clothes, and Metal onto a table so he can begin repairs. Also, I love the relationship between these two in the comic. It's the best it's ever been. And I also love how quickly he becomes the Shredder to Rough and Tumble's Bebop and Rocksteady. And Starline, despite having gone through all of this trouble just to bring back the good doctor, doesn't get so much as a thank you. But Starline's not done proving his worth. He not only tracked down and brought back Eggman and his own assistants, both with his intelligence and the Warp Topaz, and 2 lumbering lackeys who already hate Sonic, he also brought along all 7 Chaos Emeralds. Oh boy. A short while after Eggman gets himself caught up on all of Metal Sonic's data he had collected as Neo, Starline points out how close Metal got to winning, and with a few tweaks, they could potentially take out Sonic once and for all. But Eggy dismisses this. Plan's over and done with. It's time to move on to something else. Starline is excited at the prospect and amazed how quickly Eggman has a new scheme ready to go, but also keep the scene in mind going forward. The choices made by both Sonic and Eggman are going to be further explored as this story carries on. Now that he has his lackeys, it's time to put them to work. Eggman sends them off on their missions while bringing out the plans for his big comeback, declaring the world had made him suffer a major defeat, and in turn, he would make the world suffer. And little did Sonic, the reader, or even Eggman himself know just how bad things were gonna get. And that's where we're gonna end things today. Like I said, we're gonna hold off the general thoughts and thank yous till the very end of this arc, but I will be back very soon to jump into the first official arc of the Metal Virus Saga. Next up, Infection. Toot toot, Sonic Warriors!